we're at 2014. 2040 is, what, 26 years away? 26 years. That'll put those kids, in their 40s. And they're going to be the ones sitting at mission control, if not actively up in the craft. Those will probably be kids or people in their mid to late 20s. So consider that. Consider this as a investment, a private investment into the future of our nation. Great stuff. So Texas welcomes SpaceX, and they're set to do their first launch from their private launch pad somewhere next year in 2015. So that's going to mean a lot of work in a short period of time, which of course means construction jobs, etc. So that's going to be a more of an economic shot in the arm for Texas, who right now is leading the nation in job creation. About 20% of the jobs created per month in that jobs report are being created in Texas. It's 20% from one-fifth from 1/50th of the nation. Think about it. Doing the state of Texas is doing 10 times what it should be, or what your average state is doing. So that's something for consideration, and that's some interesting things. So again, things coming from Governor Perry are kind of impressive. It leads to, or it begs the question of if he's actually considering a 2016 run for the Oval Office or not. Speaking of things that he's doing that perhaps the federal government has not been, think about the federal VA, as I already talked about the problems going on with them a little bit earlier. So what's Texas doing about it?
Our men and women in uniform have valiantly served and profoundly sacrificed for our nation. That's why Texas is expanding staffing at the Texas Veterans Hotline with experts trained to help veterans deal with the VA. Callers can learn what they qualify for, and in the most urgent cases, TVC experts will work directly with the VA to help veterans get the answers and care they need and deserve. Call the hotline at 1-800-252-VETS. Thank you.
Of course, that was 1-800-252-VETS. And I know that's Texas-centric, but with Fort Hood being here in Texas, with Fort Bliss being here in Texas, with the San Antonio area having the Fort Sam Houston and two large Air Force bases, with Lackland and Randolph. And then you go over to the coast, and we have a bunch of naval locations there, as well as Army shipping locations there on the Gulf Coast. We have a lot of military stationed here in Texas. So these things are not just for those who have separated from service. You're a veteran after 18 months of honorable service. So if you know somebody stationed at one of these locations in Texas, give them the number. If you know somebody who is stationed elsewhere but is from Texas, but you've met them hanging around San Diego in case they're a Marine or other locations, and you know that they're still in, but they're planning on going back home when they get out, give them the number. If you know somebody who's in and might not be from Texas, but is looking at going to a Texas school for college once they separate, they're looking at using their GI Bill for that, even if it's the online schools, which is an option these days. Give them the number for the Texas Veterans Bureau. Again, that's 1-800-252-VETS. And if they're getting out and don't know where they're going to settle yet, give them the number so they can find out what Texas has to offer, so they can make an informed decision. So it's not just for those people who are currently in Texas. Now, speaking about veterans, we had a couple of veterans go kind of toe-to-toe a a while back, and it generated some controversy. Well, that controversy kind of generated a lot of comments, most of which, well, I'm going to cut to the chase here. There was an altercation between the author of American Sniper, and of course talking about the Devil of Ramadi himself, Chris Kyle. Rest in peace, brother. He was at a private sort of memorial, sort of. You have to be military to really understand what I mean by that. But for Mansour, Michael Mansour, a fallen SEAL, and they were doing a toast in his memory at a bar. This is how the story goes. And allegedly, or supposedly, Ventura made some disparaging comments in general about SEALs, and that how he felt that more of them need to die because, the war is bad and wrong and blah, 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 blah. And as the tall tale goes, so to speak, the altercation became physical, and supposedly Chris Kyle put Jesse the Body, Governor Ventura, in his place using his fists. That's how the story goes. Now, unless you were there and witnessed it, you don't know. And right now, with the exception of the people who were there, it becomes Ventura's word against those who were actively there. Many of which didn't testify for one reason or another. Maybe they were there and witnessed it and went back and were deployed later on. It might be deployed now, maybe deployed and didn't come back. Whatever the case may be. So when you come down to a he said type of situation where you have Ventura's word against Chris Kyle's, and Chris Kyle was murdered, well, then there's only one person alive and speaking. And that kind of has led a lot to the question behind the whole court case. And there's a lot of things to consider in this. I had a long discussion with Chris Widener, the one of the owners of BuzzPo, and he makes some very, very key points about how Ventura's primary means of supporting himself was as a public figure, public speaking, etc. And if his allegations were true that Kyle defamed him, then the hit that came to his business and his income, it does deserve some kind of recompensation, if that's the way the case was. If it wasn't, of course, then, Jesse's a blowhard. Well, Jesse's been a blowhard for a long time, so that's nothing new. But, of course, a lot of people are outraged, not because of the possibility that Chris Kyle may have over-exaggerated or even fabricated the tale, or not. A lot of people claim that should be brought into consideration because he's dead now and you can't sue a dead person. So there's a little bit of bad feelings towards Ventura for then turning around and suing Taya Kyle, Chris's widow. So, be that as it may, the case went to court. It was allowed. The suit went through, and then the jury made their decision. Now, it wasn't a unanimous decision, and the Kyles could have said, we want the unanimous decision. Instead, they said, there's a majority decision, we'll take the majority decision, without knowing what that verdict was. So, whatever. That's how it turned out. That's the facts. That's reality. Was Jesse Ventura justified in what he did? Maybe, maybe not. From his perspective, I'm sure he was. From the perspective of many other people, maybe not. And there's people who don't know all the facts in the case who are picking up sides on one side or the other. Myself included. So, But I will admit my bias. Very clearly, I have a lot of respect for Chris Kyle and his family. So, and not very much for Jesse Ventura because of his 9/11 trutherism crap, where he's blatantly making stuff up. I mean, he concentrates on things going on with the World Trade Center, and when you bring up the attack on the Pentagon and Flight 93, he kind of blows you off and says, those have nothing to do with the World Trade Center bombings. They're all done by the same group, buddy. But anyway, even Sarah Palin has jumped in talking about Ventura now. And she's made fun of him, basically saying, oh, the reason why Jesse, the body Ventura, even sued Chris Kyle is because Chris Kyle made him look unmanly. Wah. She called him out for being a jackass for filing the suit against Chris Kyle's widow, Taya. It's the fact that, she even brings up you really can't sue a dead person. So, to try to prove Kyle's story false, it's kind of hard without the person being alive and able to tell their story and then judge them based on it. So that's kind of what went down, and Sarah Palin really lambasts Ventura here. In fact, here's some of what she had to say. She said, "Hey, tough guy, Jesse Ventura. Your feelings were hurt because you perceived your reputation was besmirched by words in a book? So you turn around and sue, expecting $2 million from a military widow and her fatherless children? Yeah, like that's going to help your reputation, jackass." Yeah, that comes from Governor Palin, and she continues on. For those who may not know, Sarah Palin was at Chris Kyle's funeral and memorial service, so she was definitely had a lot of respect for Chris Kyle and his family. So, she does have a little bit of an emotional attachment. But the really interesting thing is there's no direct mention of the Ventura incident in the book American Sniper. So that entire fact kind of changes things a little bit. Now, it's not just your larger public figures to include, and I'm sure he doesn't like being a public figure, but he is one Marcus Luttrell, the one SEAL who survived the incident in Afghanistan where Michael Murphy was killed. Of course, they made a movie about it called Soul Survivor, but even he came out. He just going after Ventura for the fact that he sued Taya Kyle. But here from Eric Reed, real quickly, because our time is winding down, I'm going to read the beginning of a letter, open letter, from Eric Reed, our primary Second Amendment advocate over at BuzzPo, a writer. And he publishes this editorial letter to Jesse, as he calls him, Jesse the Soulless Ventura. And it says, "Dear Mr. Ventura, it's come to America's attention that you filed a lawsuit against an American hero's grieving widow for alleged damages you sustained as a result of Chris Kyle's book. It's also come to America's attention that you have been awarded approximately $2 million for Mr. Kyle's grieving widow. And finally, it's come to America's attention that Miss Sarah Palin called you a jackass for your recent decisions to file suit in the first place. I don't believe that Miss Palin was accurate in calling you a jackass, as a jackass at least has a soul. I wholeheartedly believe that your name should be changed to Jesse the Soulless Ventura, as anybody who could ever stoop so low can't possibly have one. Chris Kyle served his country honorably, fighting for not only a cause he believed in, but also for the continued freedom of all Americans. America's a better and stronger nation because of Mr. Kyle, and I believe that his legacy will live on for decades to come. As we know, Mr. Kyle was tragically murdered, and he felt it was a wise idea to rob his grieving widow and children. Obviously, you were awarded the settlements, so there must have been some compelling evidence, but Mr. Kyle wasn't there to defend himself, was he? And the letter goes on, and I suggest everybody kind of give a read of that, give it a look over. And that comes from Mr. Eric Reed again. Again, that's just one person's opinion. And I tend to agree to a great extent with Mr. Reed and Governor Palin. But again, I can very, very openly admit that I have a very strong bias. Chris Kyle served in the same war that I fought, or one of the wars I fought. And I can attest to the fact that his service, that what he did in combat there, saved the lives of people I know. That's a fact. It kind of paints my bias a little bit, and I understand that. I'm going to freely admit it, and I'm going to be proud of it, because that's what we do as soldiers and SEALs and sailors and Marines and even some of the Air Force members, I guess. That's a joke, kind of inter-military teasing that we do. They do hard work too, but I have to tease them. Anyway, all things considered, we do this little thumping of the chest and poking at each other, and it's supposed to be brotherly. But if Jesse did do what he is alleged to have having done at Mansour's memorial and made the statements he did, he probably deserved to get his head noogied a little bit, so to speak, or his arm thumped, or whatever the case might be. What brothers do with each other, back and forth when one starts to step out of line. So, if it happened, he deserved it. If it didn't actually happen, I do have to kind of side with Chris Widener on this and say that if it is true that Kyle manufactured and fabricated the story, and it harmed Ventura's livelihood, then he deserves some recompensation. The problem is the jury was not unanimous, and in my humble opinion, if the evidence had been that compelling, it would have been a unanimous jury. And the fact that Chris Kyle could not be there to face his accuser and to cross-examine his accuser or present the things to his attorney so his attorney could do so kind of lends to the fact that this was there was a stacked deck. Now, I do want to bring one quick thing up in all this, and that is that, from my understanding, the trust funds for the children, for the Kyle children, are off limits. So this money was not taken away from the children's future. So keep that in mind when you do your rhetoric, pro or con, Mr. Ventura. So that's my 2 cents on the whole Jesse Ventura altercation there. Is if you can keep an open mind about it, go ahead and weigh the pros and cons of it. I cannot keep an open mind on it. I try, but I still have a very strong bias, and I will graciously admit that. And then real quick, before I sign off for the day, is one more article to look at over at BuzzPo. There's a great one there. There's a Marine vet who is assaulted by pro-Hamas goons. There's a CAIR-sponsored protest, pro-Gaza, pro-anti-Israel protest. And this Marine vet was counter-protesting, and the mob